Good morning. My name is Joshua Palmer. I am the head of content and research for Onboard. If you're here for the Onboard by Passageways webinar, June 27th at 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Time, how to improve your board's efficiency, you're in the right space. We are just going to give the room a couple of minutes to fill in as we wait for the top of the hour here. So just a couple of minutes before we get started with Max and Tamara. But we certainly do appreciate your presence today, and we're excited to have this conversation in this presentation for you. So we'll just give it a few more minutes as we wait for more folks to filter into the room here. Again, if you're just joining us, thank you for joining us. We'll get underway here in just a few minutes. My name is Josh Palmer. I am head of content and research for Onboard, and I'm very happy to have you join us today for this engaging presentation about how to improve your board's efficiency. We certainly have some great conversations and discussions here. As we're at the top of the hour, I'll go ahead and get started with some just light housekeeping items. This is a Zoom webinar, so all guests are mute by default. We would love to see your faces, but we are on a Zoom webinar and the platform doesn't quite allow it. However, we do welcome your comments, your commentary, your questions about anything that we're going to discuss today in this presentation. You can use the Zoom Q&A feature or the chat feature. We will be live and responding to both. The Q&A portion of the presentation will be towards the end of the show. But please, as the conversation is developing, please, if you have anything that sparks a note or a suggestion or a question with you, please send your comments or your questions. We'll certainly get those answered with our experts today. And we do have one small ask, is that you help us deliver better content and presentations for you. We have a very short 15-second feedback poll right before the audience Q&A session towards the end. Very easy, just helps us get feedback and improve the presentation for you for the next time. If you're not familiar with Onboard by Passageways, we design software, digital experiences that make board meetings more secure, more simple, and more effective. We all know that board meetings are kind of cognitive overload by design, so we try to get all the preparation, the debate, the discussion, all those things in a digital platform. Centralized communication in a secure fashion so boards can be more efficient and effective in their governance. This is a quote from our co-founder and CEO, Parun Chadha, who continues to lead the organization. He's been leading us for the last 20 years. There are three types of board meetings. There's the board meeting that you prepared for, the board meeting that you had, and the board meeting that you wish you had. And it's certainly our endeavor as a board portal provider to always give you that third type of board meeting. So it's very much my pleasure today to be able to introduce our two panelists today for this conversation on how to improve your board's efficiency. Joining us today is Max Franchitto. Sorry, pulling up my notes here. Max is the founder and managing principal of MGF Consulting Group, which was established in 1999, and Build Your Board. Prior to establishing MGFCG, Max gained his experience, including 18 years in executive management with significant achievements in executive roles within the financial services industry, including funds management and insurance. He consults to a wide variety of boards in both commercial and FP space on matters of corporate governance, boardroom protocols, director selection, strategic planning, and mergers and acquisitions. And his clients inevitably come back, given his work ethic and dedication to the task he performs and the quality of his services. So Max, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us today. And also joining us today is Tamara Barr. She's with CSB Corporate Services, which was born out of the passion and commitment to deliver a better service to entrepreneurial companies seeking to outsource their corporate governance function. They're forward-thinking professionals seeking to work with like-minded businesses who understand that good governance drives success. Founded in 2015 in London and brought home to Melbourne in 2020, CSB Corporate Services is a fresh contender in the industry that brings a collective experience of professional governance with more than 30 years of total experience. Tamara has been a practicing company secretary and corporate governance advisor for 18 years, working across a diverse range of corporate sectors and industries. She's worked predominantly in Australia as well as in UK and Europe. providing advice and guidance to ASX-listed public and NFP companies. So welcome, Tamara. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Great. As I said, my name is Josh Palmer. I'm the head of content. I'll be your moderator today. I will say that I am obviously from the North American continent, so I might have some differences in some of the titles we use, such as company secretary versus corporate secretary. So I apologize in advance for any confusion for my accent or my difference in definition there. Max and Tamara, one of the things that we wanted to talk about today, and probably the leading off the question. Here in North America, we just completed a board effectiveness survey. We do this every year. And one of the things that we were really interested in was not only what drives effectiveness in corporate governance, but what kind of margin of ineffectiveness, if you will, there is in corporate governance. And so we asked our survey respondents, we had more than 350 respondents from a diverse range of industries, all types of board roles, professions, including company secretaries and executives. We said, on average, for your board, how many members of your board, seats, directors, however you want to call it, how many of those are ineffective in their roles? And it was quite surprising to see that the average number was 17% of board directors, according to our survey respondents, were ineffective in their roles. So I don't know if Max and Tamara, if you think that is high, low, or if you experience the same thing in Australian corporate governance. So I guess that's kind of the leading question there is, what is your take on ineffective directors in corporate governance?
Okay.
If I might start. Alleviate any confusion.
Okay. Well, ineffectiveness needs to be defined because quite often they have different interpretations of whether they are actually being effective. But there is definitely a concerning number. Now, whether it's 17 or 27 or 37, I'm of the opinion that if it's one, it's probably always one too many. You're there as a collective, as a think tank collective, and you should contribute to the best of your capabilities. So it is a concern. It's not, regardless of the number that came out of the survey, I think it'd be naive to think that every board has 100% effectiveness. But in Australia, I'm finding over the 2 decades that I've been working with boards is that there's always a sleeping portion. And therein lies a challenge for an effective chair. And so effective chair, effective board members.
Yeah, and I'll add to that the definition of ineffectiveness, or I guess the opposite of effectiveness, was preparation for board meetings. Have you read the materials, and do you understand the board pack?
Yeah.
Engagement in meetings, collaboration with your peers and your peer directors, those types of things.
Yeah.
Tamara, what would you say is something that would lead to more effective directors and then more effective boards in that role?
Sure. So I could spend ages answering this question, but I'm sure we've got lots of time in this meeting for other points. But the first top main 3 things, which seem administrative, but I believe they're actually imperative for effective boards, is a well-designed agenda built for strategic discussion, well-written minutes by a business-minded company secretary so that we can be reminded of what's happened over the past year or however long to refer back and move forward easily, rather than quibbling over what may or may not have been thought to have been said. We've got an accurate record there, and properly managed action items. So following through on what has come out of those previous meetings, and as long as we have strategic agendas written strategically, minutes written well, then we can push those action items through to make sure that the board and the company underneath that board is effective.
Yeah, that's great. I think one of the things that we identified in the survey and just in the pre-meeting conversations we have is that Max referred to them as kind of the sleeping directors. How do you encourage kind of the stakeholder engagement and collaboration from those directors if you're not getting that contribution in the meeting, despite maybe having a clear agenda, maybe despite having a detailed and accurate meeting minutes from previous sessions?
So we would encourage the board to do an independent board review. And part of that independent board review is a peer review of yourself as a director. And that's where we can start to find capability gaps, and start to understand where the ineffectiveness is coming from, whether they feel like it's coming from individual directors or a chair that's not strong enough, or possibly a governance person that doesn't have the right frame of mind to be in that seat.
And yeah, and that's pretty much Tamara's right. That you know, you need there's an opportunity for self-reflection, and I often say to directors, and we do it as part of our board reviews, what's your purpose for being here? You know, if your purpose is to fatten up your CV, then yep, you can sit quietly in a corner and say nothing and contribute nothing. But if you have a greater purpose than just putting a whole list of board seats on your CV, then you need to act accordingly. And you know, what is your purpose? What is the cause that brought you to this boardroom? And what do you think your difference will be? I'm a great believer. I mean, this is an Australianism, the Jenny Craig effect. You know, there's got to be a before and after you've been on this board. And so tell me as a board member, what is your input, and how big a hole is it going to leave when you move on to your next board? And if you can't determine any of that, then maybe you are a sleeping director, and maybe you should question whether your seat on the board is purposeful. And if it's not, then it's time to move on.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Practicing your duty of care by contributing. One thing I've heard previously in some of my conversations with corporate governance experts is that, you know, it may take 1, 2, even 3 years for a new director to feel fully oriented and able to contribute to the board and the organization it serves. Is there a sweet spot in that onboarding process that you recommend, or is there a time limit of, you know, hey, it's 24, 36 months, and we expect you to be fully engaged and contributing to every meeting? So apologies if you hear my dog in the background.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's a little bit like, well, to take the American analogy, you know, we give every president the first 90 days to prove themselves, right? I'm a great believer that, yes, you know, no matter how experienced a director you are, when you join a board, there is going to be a settling in period. And that differentiates from individual to individual, and from board to board. But there definitely has to be some sort of benchmark put in by the board, an expectation that, you know, this is your second, your third board meeting, but sooner or later, you know, you've got to kick in. You've got to kick in. You've got to start making an impact. You've got to drive the conversation. You've got to challenge the conversation. You've got to make statements that are purposeful and directed. Because after all, you know, your job description lies in the title, director. And what do directors do? They direct. So, you know, happy to have you go through a honeymoon period. Let's call it the presidential 90 days. But it's got to happen. It's got to happen. That's my thought, and that's been always my mantra with new board members.
I think it's important as well to ensure that there's a really robust induction process. The director should be making sure they themselves are asking for the right documents, but it's also good for the company to make sure that's all lined up and ready to go. And having a great portal where you can drop all of that is really helpful.
Yeah. And then Max, my apologies, Max.
Sorry?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was interrupting you. Max, you had mentioned that
No.
that also kind of falls on the role of the chair to ensure that every director is contributing their stake in the meeting. Are there some behaviors or actions that you recommend chairs take if there is kind of a quieter board member to kind of pull that information out of them, like call them out on the floor in the meeting, or?
Look, name and shame never works well. But I think a lot of chairs feel nervous about having that conversation with a board member that they've actually invited onto the board. And then it's been ratified at an AGM and duly elected. But the point is, they have to have that conversation. It's part of the leadership package of being a chair. That you've got to get the most out of your team. And it is a team game. Directorship is about being part of a collective, not uniform. You're entitled to be in total disagreement with each other. In fact, a little bit of opposition in the boardroom makes for a good, effective board because, issues get challenged and ideas get challenged. Absolutely.
Tamara, do you have any insights there as far as the role of the chair and making sure that all directors are contributing at least their individual points of view?
It's important to obviously have a strong person as chair. That person needs to allow the entire board to speak up, though. It's important for the chair to throw to different directors around the room, especially when you look at your board skills matrix. You will hopefully have directors with different skill sets. Not that we shouldn't have directors who only have one set of skills, like a legal person or something else who isn't a bit more well-rounded. But it's important for the chair as well to throw around the room to those people and know who they're throwing to. Also, if you have committees with committee chairs, for the board chair to ask that chair of the committee to open up and talk about what's happened at the recent committee or what that committee has endorsed.
Mm-hmm. And this is just me out of curiosity. What do you think is the most in-demand director skill right now from the clients and customers you serve?
Well, actually, I'm going to say it's governance, especially here in Australia. It's just growing. ESG reporting, other types of reporting that are newly required and coming in January, and it's important for boards to understand how ASIC and the ASX is monitoring activities and performance, and it needs to really be forefront.
Yeah, and I agree with Tamara. I think governance, directorship has become a little bit diluted over the years as to the importance of understanding the governance goes behind sitting on a board. People join a board and they think it's a generic business discussion group. When governance is a real issue, I teach in an MBA program, so sometimes I get it helps me because it takes me back to the grassroots of governance, and I say to directors, what's your take on your sustainability responsibility, or your environmental impact responsibility, or your social impact responsibility? And they don't see that as part of their governance package. They just, look, I'm sure that our people in management are looking into that, working with that. Well, it needs to be taken up to the next level. So, we need some skills. We need for directors in Australia in particular to become much more aware, and I don't say this in a disparaging way, but you did a director's course, no matter who you did it with, in 2009, and you haven't read a piece of trending corporate governance matter since. Well, imagine if your GP was that way in tune with their practice, right? You'd get diagnosed with all sorts of funny ailments. So, governance is a living, I always say to my students, it's the best subject you can do because it's a living organism. It changes daily, almost. You can't pick up an Australian financial newspaper without seeing some element of governance being discussed or challenged or scandalised even at times. We've had our fair share of scandals here in Australia. So it's really important to understand that, it's more than just, it is governance. It really is about the word governance, understanding what that entails in your job description as a director.
That's great. Yeah, and coming from the States, we have no shortage of headlines about boards and directors and CEOs and conflict.
Yeah. The evidence is there. You know what I mean? It's not as if you say, "Oh, look, there's no demand for me to learn more." Well, there's huge opportunity for improvement. Huge opportunity for improvement.
Absolutely. With that, Max, I think I'd love to share this diagram that you shared with us, because I think it's really clarifying in terms of what is your board of directors meant to do. I think a lot of boards get into this kind of operational, overly detailed, kind of in the weeds, micromanaging maybe some of the operational things, and they get away from the strategic decision making and the long-term thinking that needs to happen to govern their corporate organizations. So I'll bring this up, and Max, maybe you can walk us through this if I can share my screen here without. There we go.
Yeah, I mean, Robert Tricker initiated this diagram. In his first edition of his book, he's now up to the 4th edition of his book, and it's a simplistic, very simplistic diagram. And, boards are about 2 basic elements, conformance and performance. In the 2 decades plus that I have been working with boards, I have found an extraordinary high amount of time being spent on the conformance. Let's keep ASIC in Australia, Australian Securities and Investment Commission. Let's keep APRA for your financial services in Australia. Let's keep all of those statutory bodies really happy. And let's do a really good job of acting as the watchdog for our highly paid executive team, right? And so on the left-hand side, there's a lot of time being spent on the left. Less time being spent on the performance activities, and hence that drags the growth of the organisation from a strategic point way back as far as the board is concerned. So my question to them is, let's assume that your board meeting was 4 hours long, just to make it fit in with the diagram. If you're probably spending an hour in each quadrant, it's probably the wrong balance. I'd like to see you spend more time on performance, but if you have conformance well and truly mapped out properly, right? So because accountability to external statutory bodies should be your bread and butter, right? That's your bread and butter, So that shouldn't take a huge amount of your time, because you should have that systemized if you're an effective board. And that'll take us to something else that we'll need to discuss. But I find that, they struggle with this diagram, and I keep on going back to boards that I've had to repeat board review sessions with, and saying, what's the problem? Max, they say to me, we've been working on the right-hand side, and then that lasted about 3 meetings, and then we, eventually the board dragged itself back to the left again, right? And this actually frustrates management, because if you've got a progressive C-suite, they find it really strategically impairing the fact that the board is not helping them in strategy formulation and policy making. Again, goes back to the name. You're a director. Somebody is looking for your direction. So, this simplistic model that Robert Tricker has come up with some years ago, is really a really basic roadmap as to the focus of the board, and it should be used accordingly. You know, it's not. I always say, look, keep it in the back of your mind, or put it in the back of your notebook when you attend your board meeting, and always ask yourselves: are we spending the right proportion of time between conformance and performance? Are we serving the internal masters far too much when we should be maybe serving the external masters, like customers and future employees, future customers, with more devotion towards strategy and policy making? So that's why I'm a big fan of this very basic model.
Yeah.
Not hard to follow. Let's just focus on it. Let's follow it.
And Tamara, your thoughts on that? Is this something that is this a model you employ within your clients and customers?
Yeah, absolutely. And this comes back to having a well-written agenda to encourage that strategic discussion, as well as ensuring to cover off those conformance activities. The other thing that I find impedes effective board meetings is conforming to antiquated ways of running a board meeting that are simply not necessary and used more for hierarchical reasons. So it's important that all directors remember that they all have the exact same responsibility, legal responsibility and regulatory responsibility to the company as a director. And it's important to remember not to spend a lot of time ticking off old governance board ways, like through the chair, I would like to ask a question or what have you, or for example, having office bearer positions that are really not useful or used.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
things like
really
standing committees that do no real work or don't have a function.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that makes that left side fatter where it doesn't need to be. To Max's point, it should be the right side where the directors are pushing.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and I'll take the slide away here. But we mentioned earlier board evaluations, assessments, kind of the 360-degree individual assessments, and your assessment of the board, and maybe having a third-party independent assessment of your board to ensure that you're being accountable and you're performing your duties and the board's duties. But for most boards, that's a once-a-year type of activity, if not less than once a year. How do just in thinking about Max's cautioning of drifting away, back into operational minutia versus the strategic decision making? How do you gather that feedback from directors? Like, hey, are we still in the policy making, progressive forward, future forward thinking, or are we kind of devolving back into this operational mindset? Is there a way that either the chairs or the directors can raise their hand and say, hey, I think we're not focusing on the right things? I'm curious how do directors raise their voice in that manner?
Yeah, for sure. So board should be aware that every 3 years they need to have an external review. Every the first and second year, they should be having basically an internal review that's provided by an expert so that they've got something useful to follow. If it gets to a point, and the directors will know when they're feeling like this, if it gets to a point where they are feeling that the board itself is inefficient, or that there's strained conversation, or inequality, or things like that, it's an idea to have every board meeting survey review of that board at the end of the board. Having said that, it's really good to engage somebody like Max to help make that useful, because I've seen situations where you've got the same questions going on for you know, a year, and everyone's just kind of ticking it off after the board meeting, and it's really not getting anywhere. So it's important to have a professional help the board with the internal reviews and external reviews.
Yeah, and look, Josh, it's one of the most common frustrations I hear from directors, established directors, that, you know, we're stuck in a rut. How do we get out of this? You know, we just go to meetings and we're churning the same discussion over and over again. You know, and so they know it. It's not as if it's not, you know, obvious to them. It's not, you know, it's a little bit like, you know, anything else. You know it's happening, but the question is, you can either let it happen to you or make it happen differently.
Mm-hmm.
That's the question I put to them. You know, you can let it wash over you, right? And then it'll make you a lethargic, slow-moving, sloth-type board, or you can do something about it. Now, whether it's the chair that takes the initiative or other board members speak up, you know what? The chair doesn't have to do everything. You know, the chair is a title. I mean, people seem to have forgotten that in traditional governance, back in the early formulation of governance structures, the chair was a rotating role. It wasn't always the same person. So, you know, if you're a senior director, put your hand up and say, look, guys, we're in a rut here. We've been discussing this issue for the last 3 board meetings. Let's make a decision. Let's be strategic. Let's establish a policy on this. You know, let's get on with it and move on to the next point.
And,
Right.
and I also, can I add to that? If you have a sloth-like, if I can use your term, company secretary, there isn't that connection between the board and the C-suite to get anything moving, get the wheels moving. So if a director is actually going to stand up and say, guys, we've been having the same conversation for so long, why isn't our C-suite doing anything? What's happening? What's not happening? You should be ensuring and having a look at your governance function to see if you have a strong, properly, I don't want to say educated because it's the wrong word, but properly minded person in that governance position to put those pieces together and get all that moving. Because again, I've seen situations when I've joined a company where a director said to me, I've been saying this for 6 months or 12 months or whatever. Okay, so how do we get that moving? You need somebody else to go, yes, agree, let's have a expert review, or let's change our agendas, or let's change our strategy, or whatever.
Yeah. And part of that, I think, is just being able to evaluate the skills and composition of your board, of, you know, do we have the right skill set in all the positions with all the directors for what the organization actually needs to achieve? Is that, you feel like that's true as well?
Yeah, absolutely. That should be established when the board is established. Is a board skills matrix, which lays out the capabilities, but also lays out the capabilities you would like.
Mm-hmm.
And then every time you have any type of review, an independent one or an internal one, you should be sitting with your board skills matrix, and a new one should be spat out at the end of it of where your gaps are, which will be a good review should be able to point that out for you.
And the gap analysis board review type approach is probably a good starting point, you know, and that goes back to our very initial conversation. You know, have I got the right people around my boardroom table? You know, you've got to make sure that that's the case, because that could be part of the problem, is that you've got disinterested, inappropriately qualified, inappropriately driven individual directors, in which case, well, all the tricker models in the world are not going to help you, right? It's just a piece of paper with a diagram on it.
Yeah.
So that's really important. You know, it's a team game. It's a team game. I always say to boards, This is a team game. This is not, you know, a club where you come together once a month and show off how clever you each are to each other. You know, this is a team game, and you've got to have the right players. If you haven't got the right players, then you need to go out and buy the right players, so to speak. Formulate your team. You know, if you're a sporting person, you get the analogy. You know what I mean? In Australia, you know, we're for football fanatics. I always say, you know, maybe you've got too many tall blokes. Maybe you shouldn't, you know, you need too many, you know, whatever it is. Change your formulation to change the pace at which you work.
Absolutely. You know? And I would say that, to harken back to something you said earlier, Max, about, you know, governance is kind of a continually evolving model. It's a human system. There's so many things that are changing in the external world that need to be brought into the boardroom. Cybersecurity, you know, AI skills, just basic corporate governance skills. That if you're not fielding those players in the boardroom, you're not going to win. To continue the sports analogy.
Yeah, and look, AI is a big one, and I know you'll want to touch on it, but AI is going to be the next big challenge for boards. I think there's, you know, like data security was the big one of the last 3 to 5 years with all the breaches that have happened around the world. AI is the next big one that's going to really rattle the director cage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that brings back to kind of the question of technology. Tamara, Max, I don't know if you've noticed a difference between those boards or those directors that kind of fully employ, say, a digital board portal or some other kind of more nuanced technology versus kind of the very basic, you know, paper board pack printout or even just an email with PDF. Do you see a difference in the effectiveness or the efficiency of those boards just based on the methods they use to prepare and actually execute their board meetings?
Yes, I do. And I think sometimes there's a correlation between that refusal to move forward. If you're not going to move forward with technology, you're also not looking forward at what changes there are in, you know, governance or other finance reporting or whatever else. So I think I've definitely seen a lot of paper shuffling, which can create more time in a board meeting. And it really, I find it really frustrating when everybody doesn't have the same pack because something's changed in a week. And software can really alleviate that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, look, paper's a wonderful weapon for self-defense in making yourself feel busy. If you've got lots of paper on your desk, I must be a busy person. And that's not always true, right? And I say that with all respect to my legal colleagues who have desks that they are covered in paper. But, you know, I think the age of technology has given governance a wonderful weapon with which to fight ineffectiveness and inefficiency. And, but, you know, for instance, as I was saying earlier, AI is part of that. You know, and technology has its pros and cons, but, you know, I'm still seeing boards with and I'm talking very, very medium-sized organizations. I'm not talking, you know, ASX top 200, right? Or, you know, and New York Stock Exchange top 200. I'm talking about smaller companies with 15, 16 pieces of reporting documentation, PDF after PDF after PDF, repeated every month. And, you know, and you send them a PDF and they print it out. And then they end up with a mountain of paper, which they put in a 2-ring binder and take to the board meeting. Or worse still, you give them the 2-ring binder with all the paper in it, right? You know, you've got to be careful how you work with it electronically, but the electronic tools are there. You know,
absolutely.
You can, you know, there are a lot of opportunities to do something, right? So, and it's a greater way to keep records as well.
Yeah,
it's a
the
greater
compliance
way,
factor is
and you
something
can.
Yeah, is huge there, right? Of if you can kind of automate your record keeping rather than have to hunt down a PDF that you sent 2 weeks ago at the board meeting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think technology, governance technology. Sorry, Max.
No, I was just saying, just think of the old bank book, now, I can't remember the last time I saw a bank statement, it's all issued to you electronically, and it's wonderful, it's sorted for you and everything, so use it.
Yeah, I think governance software has actually created a lot of security and protection for directors, because it guides you and assists you in not putting yourself in jeopardy in terms of writing some notes on a board pack and storing it at home.
Yeah, or as I say, leaving it in an Uber or a taxi or something.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
Apologies, my dog's barking again. But the other thing that I think was really interesting that came out of the survey data that we had from respondents was that on average, directors said that they spent 8 to 10 hours preparing for a board meeting. That was kind of the average, the minimum requirement. But then the board administrator who is responsible for sending the board pack would only send the board pack probably 4 to 10 days in advance of the meeting. So you have to, it's almost crunch time before an exam or a test to be fully prepared for this board meeting. And then, God forbid something happens like, oh, we have to update the financials at the last minute. So you have to send all the materials out again. So I think that's another advantage of technology, is that you can have it in one location, update it in real time, and you're not sending out paper copies or having version control issues. Ann Cornish noted, and I think this is a great note, she said records management for boards is essential and part of your governance regime, but even automating your records management requires governance, rules, guidelines, standards, those types of things. Tamara, you had mentioned the importance of having accurate meeting minutes that can be reflected in the archive. What kind of policies or rulemaking do you set up around those minutes? So they're not maybe verbatim for every single debate or policy discussion, but that they're actually an accurate reflection of what happened in the boardroom.
I will answer that. I was actually going to refer to the point that one of our attendees just made, actually, which is that record keeping side of it. So we ensure that all of our minutes, the signed versions, are obviously kept in a place that directors can access that's secure to anybody else, so the portal. We also ensure that resolutions and action items are recorded separately, but also securely as well, so we can reach those quickly without having to open 24 sets of minutes over the last 2 years to find something. Mm-hmm. And we also, this is kind of a side note, but we also use, for example, a corporate document register, so that we can keep up to date and never miss a date that a document needs to be reviewed. So totally agree with ensuring, even if you've got using technology, making sure that you still have governance policies. But to answer your minutes question, again, it comes back to having the right minded governance person in a board meeting that understands business, understands is financially literate, understands operations, and obviously, of course, understands the importance of governance and succinct meetings. So minutes are about the resolutions that came out of the meeting, obviously the action items, but it's about representing a story of the discussion that happened in a succinct, very black and white way that an auditor can pick up a year later and understand what was going on, or a new director can pick up 2 years ago and be able to piece together what was happening. So it's obviously about making sure that not too much is said, but not little enough that an external person who's allowed to have those minutes can't understand what's going on, or can understand what's going on.
Right. Max, apologies, I think you're on mute. But as we're waiting for Max to come back tomorrow, I'd absolutely agree that you definitely have to strike that balance of what was the substantive discussion versus not having, every odd in the conversation as a transcription. As we wait for Max to come back, I guess some of the questions. Oh, there we are, Max.
Yeah. No, I was saying, sorry, but following through on Tamara's points, is that to me, one of the things that I really want directors to understand that the minutes and the records of all of the meetings that they attend are a part of history that may be needed in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, they need to be accurate. And one of the biggest challenges I find is, especially and I don't want to single out any organization group, but I've got to say that in the not-for-profit sector, sometimes because there's a lot of volunteering going on, the records tend to be subjective to people's interpretation. Oh, I think that's what the minutes reflected, right? I think that, and they're written up slightly differently, and that is really one of the flaws of paper versus technology. Now, there are a lot more people that are recording meetings, but what is important, what I say is important to them is I say that they be accurate, because history judges the future.
Yeah.
And if in 6 months' time I need to come back because something's gone wrong based on a decision that we made 6 months ago, that record better be right, because it will impact the following 6 months going forward.
Yeah.
It could be really pleasant 6 months or not.
Yeah. And Anne has a great point here that, volunteers tend to be a little bit more subjective, and they don't, like, maybe the other directors don't check the minutes themselves to make sure they're accurate. That is one thing, just another, any board portal should be able to provide this for you, is that you can have the kind of the rough draft of the meeting minutes, and then you can have the archive version, and those can be totally separate. The archive version is what goes into the record, but the rough draft may be having more discussion and detail in it. The other thing I think is really important too is that if you're not using a dedicated kind of system of record like a board portal or a dedicated share drive or something like that, say you're using email, and Max, like you said, an auditor comes on and there's some kind of compliance question. If you have your minutes and all your other board archives in a centralized system of record like a board portal, that's the limit of the discoverability, all right? But if you have your meeting minutes in email and PDF and maybe SMS text chains between directors, or discussion points between directors on text, it opens up all those other channels for discovery, be that legal or a compliance issue or an auditor issue. So I think that's another really just great benefit of technology, is you can really compartmentalize those archives and those minutes without having an auditor actually like combing through your email inbox and learning lots of things about you may not be germane to board directing as well. So
yeah.
And Anna makes another great point. And thank you for your suggestions here. You can have a paid minute taker to eliminate the issue, to have a more objective point of view in a nonprofit situation.
Yeah, and that's the other. Sorry to interrupt. I've just been thinking this during this section. It's, again, I keep reiterating, important to have that strong governance-minded person in that company secretarial role taking the minutes, because that person needs to be strong enough to go, yes, I'll take direction on the wording, but I know what happened at that meeting, and this happened, rather than being push. Like, if you do have a not-for-profit board, let's say, for example, where you've got lots of different ideas of what happened, that can create inefficient minute recording, basically, if you don't have a person that's able to go, well, this is my job, I know how I'm doing this.
Right. Almost like a court reporter kind of role.
That's right.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Max and Tamara, as we're kind of getting to the bottom of the hour here, any closing thoughts in terms of how boards can be more efficient with their operations? Max, I think you had a great example with the model, the governance model of policy versus operational. Just in closing, any closing thoughts for our audience members today?
I hate to sound like Simon Sinek and his favorite mantra: work out your purpose. Work out your purpose. He talks about purpose in leadership. A board of directors is a leadership role. Whether you got 8, 10, 12, whatever size your board is, you're leaders. You're all leaders. So work out what your purpose is. And if your purpose doesn't fit the board you're sitting on, then go sit on another board. To take a simplistic point of view, that's my plead for, that's a first step in understanding effectiveness and efficiency.
Right.
And sometimes you have to buy a mirror, you have to buy a mirror, as I say to directors, and it hurts, to buy a mirror and have a look at yourself and say, am I really making a difference on this board?
Yeah.
And if everybody does that, you'll end up with a board of really committed, purposeful people.
I love that idea. Yeah, that's great. And Tamara, before we have your final thoughts, Canal, I don't know if you can run the poll really quickly before we close the session here. There we go. Just a couple quick questions just to help us improve our presentation for the next time. So, Tamara, any closing thoughts as we have this poll open? Or
Yeah, I would say ineffectiveness halts process and halts moving forward with your business. So make sure, as Max said, you've got the right directors on the board. Make sure you respect governance, and utilize some good technology to keep your records in order.
absolutely.
And keep up to date with your education, because it's changing every day.
Yeah, and that's one point I was
Absolutely.
kind of chomping at the bit to make, is kind of taking it back to the sports analogy. An effective director may not just be the good fit for the team, but like if you have a rookie director, let's say, they certainly can learn and up-level their skills to the point where they are contributing. Any thoughts on how to kind of become a better director, or resources to look at? Is it, certifications, or what recommendations do you have for maybe kind of entry-level directors to up-level their skills?
Okay. Well, can I just say that I tell young directors that I train, and I do a fair bit of training of aspiring young directors, and I say to them 2 things: read, and read, right? And ask why at every opportunity when you're sitting on your first board. Don't be afraid to be the why person in the room. The answer to why is a really interesting conversation. I ask you, Josh, would you like a coffee? You say yes, and I then say to you, why? Now, all of a sudden, you've got to start thinking about why you want this coffee.
Yeah. And you'd mentioned that, like the kind of the status quo of the director or the board of directors, say they've been meeting for years and they all know each other and it's a small club, but maybe somebody hasn't asked that for years and years. Yeah, I love that.
So that's the 2 things that I carry on about, like a pork chop, as they say in Aussie land. Read a lot, educate yourself, and ask why. Ask why. Why are we doing this? Why are we making this sort of decision? The answer will educate you.
To go back to Simon Sinek, find the why behind the what, right?
Yeah. See,
Yeah.
I wish I was more original. But why? But why reinvent the wheel? Why reinvent the wheel?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Tamara, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was pretty much going to say exactly what Max said as well. I would add to that, find yourself a range of experienced, ethical board director mentors, and actually, rather than talking to them just about how to perform on a board right now, talk to them about their experiences where things went wrong. Because that's where we learn from history of why laws changed, regulations changed, governance has changed and why the new way of things is trying to get better in governance. So that's what I would say. Get yourself some mentors who have been there, done that, and ask about the past.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, this is more of an aviation thing, but regulations
Yep.
are written in blood, right? So
Yeah. Read case studies.
Yeah.
why some of the laws changed. It's really interesting.
That's great. Well, Tamara, Max, thank you so much for joining us today. I think this has been a really eye-opening conversation. I hope audience members, you found the presentation helpful and informative as well. We invite you to join us for our next session when those emails go out. But Tamara, Max, thank you so much, and we'll wrap it up. But thank you for sharing your time, your experience, and your expertise with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.